Good morning. My name is Gail Werner. I'm the current chair of the Richmond Public Library Board, at least until tomorrow when my term ends. And this is day 21 of the Richmond Public Library's 100 Days RVA Reads, a program promoting the great American read by PBS and WCVE. My backdrop today is the law library in the main branch of the Richmond Public Library, and I'll tell you why that's important for me in a second. The book I chose is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. It was written in 1960 and was a Pulitzer Prize winner. And it is important to me for a couple reasons. First of all, in her infinite wisdom, my mother would read or reread books that I was reading in school, and I didn't know whether she was just interested or whether she was trying to make sure I did my homework or wanted a dinner conversation. But this really inspired her to the point that in 1967, when I was reading this, it was the height of the civil rights movement. And she took me out of school for a couple days, and we went to Washington, and we went to Capitol Hill to see the debate of the Civil Rights Act. And when we were escorted into the gallery, I can still picture the look on her face when we looked down, and behind the podium was Margaret Chase Smith, the first woman senator. So that was really exciting, and that led me to kind of a lifetime of advocacy for many things, including women's rights and access to legal information, and now library advocacy, representing this great institution. The second reason is that the legal part of this book inspired me to pursue an area of law and librarianship combined. So I just completed a 42-year career as a law librarian, first starting in DC at law firms and went to Philadelphia and to Richmond, and then ended up my career at the University of Richmond in the law library there 2 years ago. So let me get started. Let me give you a little background on the book. It was, as I said, written in 1960 and was written in the period of the 1930s in southern Alabama. And the cast of characters, there are what I think of 5 main characters. Leading the charge is Atticus Finch, who is the father of 2 young children, Jem, the boy, and Jean Louise, the girl, nicknamed Scout. And Atticus is an attorney, and he has been a court-assigned case representing a black man who was charged unlawfully with rape. So he is not the most popular guy in town, but he has some charming passages in the book about his relationship with his children. So, cast of characters, the 2 kids, Atticus and Calpurnia. Atticus is also a widower, so he has Calpurnia during the day, taking care of the kids and running the household. About halfway through the book, Aunt Alexandra is introduced, Atticus's sister, who comes to town to what Atticus felt was an important time for Jean Louise to get some woman's influence in her life. So I have selected 2 paragraphs, 2 passages to read. It was kind of hard to limit that to 2, quite frankly. And I've selected one that addresses the theme about the relationship between Atticus's children, and then a second theme about the legal part of it. So this is chapter 10. What makes this particularly charming is that it's told through the eyes of Scout. So she is the narrator through the whole book. Atticus was feeble. He was 50. When Jem and I asked him why he was so old, he got started late, which he felt reflected upon his abilities and manliness. He was much older than the parents of our school contemporaries, and there was nothing Jem or I could say about him when our classmates said, "My father, blank, blank, blank." Jem was football crazy. Atticus was never too tired to play keep away, but when Jem wanted to tackle him, Atticus would say, "I'm too old for that, son." Our father didn't do anything. He worked in an office, not in a drugstore. Atticus did not drive a dump truck for the county. He was not the sheriff. He did not farm, work in a garage, or do anything that could possibly arouse the admiration of anyone. Besides that, he wore glasses. He was nearly blind in his left eye and said left eyes were the tribal curse of the Finches. Whenever he wanted to see something well, he turned his head and looked from his right eye. He did not do things our schoolmates' fathers did. He never went hunting. He did not play poker or fish or drink or smoke. He sat in the living room and read. Isn't that awful? With these attributes, however, he would not remain as inconspicuous as we wished him to. That year, the school buzzed with talk about him defending Tom Robinson, none of which was complimentary. After my bout with Cecil Jacobs, when I committed myself to a policy of cowardice, word got around that Scout Finch wouldn't fight anymore. Her daddy would. That was not entirely correct. I wouldn't fight publicly for Atticus, but the family was private ground. I would fight anyone from a third cousin upwards, tooth and nail. Francis Hancock, for example, knew that. When he gave us our air rifles, that was at Christmas, which I found peculiar, Atticus wouldn't teach us to shoot. Uncle Jack instructed us in the rudiments thereof. He said Atticus wasn't interested in guns. Atticus said to Jem one day, "I'd rather you shot at tin cans in the backyard, but I know you'll go after birds. Shoot all the blue jays you want, if you can hit them. But remember, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird." That was the only time I ever heard Atticus say it was a sin to do something, and I asked Miss Maudie, who was a neighbor, about it. "Your father's right," she said. "Mockingbirds don't do one thing but make music for us to enjoy. They don't eat up people's gardens, don't nest in corn cribs. They don't do one thing but sing their hearts out for us. That's why it's a sin to kill a mockingbird." The second passage I want to read is Atticus's closing argument at the trial, again, of the black man, Tom Robinson, who was accused of rape. Judge Taylor nodded, and then Atticus did something I never saw him do before or since, in public or private. He unbuttoned his vest, unbuttoned his collar, loosened his tie, and took off his coat. He never loosened a scrap of his clothing until he undressed at bedtime, and to Jem and me, this was the equivalent of him standing before us stark naked. We exchanged horrified glances. Atticus put his hands in his pocket, and as he returned to the jury, I saw his gold collar button and the tips of his pen and pencil winking in the light. "Gentlemen," he said. Jem and I again looked at each other. Atticus might have said, "Scout?" His voice had lost its aridity, its detachment, and he was talking to the jury as if they were folks on the post corner. "Gentlemen," he was saying, and it's gentlemen because only men were permitted to serve on juries. "Gentlemen," he was saying, "I shall be brief, but I would like to use my remaining time with you to remind you that this case is not a difficult one. It requires no minute sifting of complicated facts, but it does require you to be sure beyond all reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the defendant. To begin with, this case should never have come to trial. This case is as simple as black and white. The state has not produced one iota of medical evidence to the effect that the crime Tom Robinson is charged with ever took place. It is relied instead upon the testimony of two witnesses whose evidence has not only been called into serious question on cross-examination, but has been flatly contradicted by the defendant. The defendant is not guilty, but somebody in this courtroom is. I have nothing but pity in my heart for the chief witness for the state, but my pity does not extend so far as to her putting a man's life at stake, which she has done in an effort to get rid of her own guilt. I say guilt, gentlemen, because it was guilt that motivated her. She has committed no crime. She has merely broken a rigid and time-honored code of our society, a code so severe that whoever breaks it is hounded from our midst as unfit to live with. She is the victim of cruel poverty and ignorance, but I cannot pity her. She is white. She knew full well the enormity of her offense, but because her desire was stronger and the code she was breaking, she persisted in breaking it. She persisted, as her subsequent reaction is something that all of us have known at one time or another. She did something every child has done. She tried to put the evidence of her offense away from her. But in this case, she was no child hiding stolen contraband. She struck out at the victim. Of necessity, she must put him away from her. He must be removed from her presence, from this world. She must destroy the evidence of her offense. What was the evidence of her offense? Tom Robinson, a human being. She must put Tom Robinson away from her. Tom Robinson was her daily reminder of what she did. What did she do? She tempted a Negro. She was white and she tempted a Negro. She did something that in our society is unspeakable. She kissed a black man. Not an old uncle, but a strong young Negro man. No code mattered to her before she broke it, but it came crashing down on her afterwards. Her father saw it, and the defendant has testified as to his remarks. What did her father do? We don't know, but there is circumstantial evidence to indicate that Mayella Ewell was beaten savagely by someone who led almost exclusively with his left. On the side about that, Tom Robinson has a physical handicap. He's unable to use his left arm. We do know in part that Mr. Ewell did. He did what any God-fearing, persevering, respectable white man would do under the circumstances. He swore out a warrant, no doubt signing it with his left hand, and Tom Robinson now sits before you, having taken the oath with the only good hand he possesses, his right hand. And so a quiet, respectable, humble Negro who had the unmitigated temerity to feel sorry for a white woman and help her has had to put his word against two white peoples. I need not remind you of their appearance and conduct on the stand. You saw them for yourselves. The witnesses for the state, with the exception of the sheriff of Macomb County, have presented themselves to you gentlemen, to this court, in the cynical confidence that their testimony would not be doubted, confident that you gentlemen would go along with them on the assumption, the evil assumption, that all Negroes lie, that all Negroes are basically immoral beings, that all Negro men are not to be trusted around our women, an assumption one associates with minds of their caliber. Which, gentlemen, we know is in itself a lie. Tom Robinson's skin is a lie I do not have to point out to you. You know the truth, and the truth is this. Some Negroes lie, some Negroes are immoral, some Negro men are not to be trusted around women, black or white, but this is a truth that applies to the human race and not to no particular race of men. There is not a person in this courtroom has never told a lie, who has never done an immoral thing, and there is no man living who has never looked upon a woman without desire. So, if this inspires you and you're interested in how it turned out, you can get this book at the Richmond Public Library and enjoy reading. Thanks for coming today. If you'd like to look at the tapes of the other days, the other 20 days, you can go to rvalibrary.org/100 days. Thanks so much for joining me.